Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chicago!
My name is Nathan Lettus, and I'm the front of house engineer for the band Chicago. I've actually been mixing Chicago since 2008, but I've been working with them since about 2005. The thing about this band is that if you come to a show and you don't really know Chicago, you'll realize that you know every song that they play. It's timeless music. It's really nice to work with really good musicians. It makes life pretty easy. True. So we just started this tour. This is a tour with the Doobie Brothers as co-headliners. Both sets are just hit after hit after hit after hit, and then they come together and do a huge joint encore that's just both bands on stage at the same time. It's like a big party atmosphere at that point. The fans really dig it, and it's a pretty cool thing. I think there's 17 guys total, so there's 3 drum kits, 1 percussion kit, 3 keyboard rigs, 4 horn players, 4 guitar players, 2 bass players, and about 9 vocalists. I actually picked up the Waves package at the beginning of this year when I integrated to this SD10. The band was using Digicodes when I first started, and then when I took over mixing, I went to an SD8 last year, and then we ended up on SD10s this year just as a natural progression. And then once the Waves started coming out, we decided that, hey, why not give it a shot? And honestly, I wasn't a plugin guy because the console sounded great to me out of the box, but now with the plugins, it's almost impossible to go back. This band, I like to work very dynamically just because they're an old school band, they're great players, and when they're quiet, I like to keep them, loud enough to be heard, but I like to work the dynamic range with these guys a lot, and it really helps, especially on the quieter tunes, to just kind of bring it up and put it in your face a little bit more, but not be overbearing. Especially, I have an L2 across the master, and that really, really helps. I went to school for recording back in the day, and we were heavy on plugins in Pro Tools. And then when I got into the live realm of things, I kind of lost all aspects of studio work. I haven't really been in the studio in probably 8 years or so. Once plugins started hitting, especially with the Avid consoles, and everybody started jumping on board with plugins, we decided that it'd probably be a good move to advance with the technology as well, just to keep up to par, With these guys, I've been really big on a lot of the Renaissance. The Renaissance package has been great for these guys. I'm using all Renaissance verbs, and most of my comps are all my comps are all Renaissance comps and Renaissance Vox. Yeah, I'm running a vocal verb, drum verb, and a horn verb, and they're all Renaissance. The thing with this show is we have four lead vocalists with 6 mics. And what they'll do is they'll hop around from position to position sometimes throughout the evening. Like, so one of my keyboard players, who's primary songwriter, will play guitar and he'll come downstage and sing as well. So I found it easiest just to put the same comp across all the mics. So we're using 6 Renaissance. Well, actually, 1 keyboard player I got a Renaissance comp on. The rest of them are Renaissance vocal comps. And we just use different presets for different guys as they come up for the most part. I kind of like the simplicity of the Renaissance stuff, and it really just, it sounds warmer to me. The console sounds warm to begin with, I thought, but with those Renaissance comps, it really helped just bring the vocals to the forefront, and it kind of gave them a nice little sparkle. Especially with this band being such a mid-rangey band, it's all horns and vocals, and that's what people come to hear. So I like to put the vocals on top of everything. I like everybody to hear the vocals. I don't want people to walk away saying they can't hear the vocals. And the Renaissance stuff seemed to really just give it a nice warmth and sparkle. And it's never overbearing. And I like the Renaissance stuff. It's very easy to, other plugins I've used before in the past is just, 15 knobs. And sometimes it gets a little overbearing, especially in the heat of the moment when you're reaching real quick. With the Renaissance stuff, it's just, 1 slider or 1 knob or so, and it's been really easy to deal with. With these guys, it's all about lead vocals, but then there's a lot of harmonies. So when you end up with 4 guys, the C4, nice, it just smooths everything out nicely. There's nothing standing out, and the harmonies come through nicely, but they sit right on top as always. So what do I do with the brass? The brass is the money. Those guys are the bosses, and they need to be heard. And that's what everybody knows about Chicago is they are a horn band. They're all wireless too. Those guys are very animated. They're running around the stage constantly. There's 4 channels, 2 saxes, trumpet, and trombone. And we EQ and compress them individually. I went through a couple of the different comps when we were starting to integrate the plugins, and I found that the V comp gave a nice warm sound, which is what we're looking for, just to kind of warm up the horns a little bit too and kind of bring them to the forefront, as we're always trying to keep the horns and the vocals right on top of the mix for the most part. The max volume is actually in there. I'm actually not even using anything besides the gate feature on that, just because they're running around the stage constantly, depending on where they end up, if they're next to a drum kit or next to a percussion or they downstage. When they're not playing, those mics seem to pick up a lot, and I kind of just put that in there. It's just kind of just to duck it a little bit, to clean up the signal a little bit. But the C4 also helps to smooth it out, the mid-range. He's got a new snare recently, and we were A-Bing a couple different comps, and I found that the H comp really helped out. It really helped bring the snare out and put a little shimmer across it in the mid-range where it can be heard constantly. It's always fighting for space with these guys with the amount of keys, guitar, horns, and vocals. So sometimes things get lost in translation, but now I think the snare is sitting perfect. The bass, I'm using a Renaissance Axe as opposed to the onboard compression, and then I actually double up the input of the bass in the console. So there's 2 bass channels, but on the second channel, I actually have a max bass inserted across it. So I'm basically, in effect, running a wet and dry bass signal. We have no cabinet, and our stage is really quiet. So it's just the DI of the bass signal. So I find that max bass can really help create some low end, especially like I said, with all the mid range of the band, you need to have some low end to compensate. Otherwise, the mix starts sounding a little shrilly. And I love the max bass because it brings the low end up, but it's never loose, and it really just helps create all those octaves that aren't there to begin with. I've got another C4 across the master, just to kind of clean up like the last stage of compression, very minimally, just to kind of help on the low end and the high end. And then also I go into a L2 after that. That's been a go-to thing. Every now and then I'll A-B with the L2 in and with the L2 out, and it's just night and day difference. It really helps to just kind of bring the mix right in your face, but it's never overbearing. And it also helps, we find that when we go into places that have dB limits when we're outside, there'll be places where, it has to sit right here. And, the noise police, it helps put a clamp on things, but it doesn't get too quiet. It just helps, with the transients quite a bit. And so the L2 is going to be one of my main go-to and mainstays for sure. I am using Doubler, which is I love that plugin. We were using a doubler off the Digico, but I really like the doubler with the wave stuff. I can spread it out, and I can put 4 voices in there and really get a nice wide sound. And I've been using that a lot on Jason, who's the bass player, who sings probably a good 70%. I'm a firm believer in utilizing technology, and we've been trying to stay up to date and ahead of the curve for a while. So if I could keep everything internal, it works out great. Which is really great is when we're really tight on space now is I've got my waves rack. It's racked in the console case right here. So realistically, the only thing I have with me is just the console. So if we walk into some place that the space is really tight, I just have the console with me, and that's all we have to take in. Everything's on board and everything's right in front of me at the touchscreen. So I don't have to go anywhere else, and I can literally stand here and not move all night. All of our inputs come into the console optically. So it's fiber optic lines, 2 fiber optic lines that are redundant. So if we lose one line, the other line picks up the slack. I have a MADI unit that basically copies my inputs 1 for 1 right after the preamp, but before all my EQ and compression. So all the tracks come into my laptop as raw tracks. So these guys stopped sound checking years ago. So what I'll do during the day is I'll play back track, and we'll get really close to show levels with the virtual playback. All the guys are on in-ear monitors, and all my guitars and Leslie cabinets are off-stage isolated. So really the only thing that we have to compensate for is the acoustics of the room if it changes with bodies, and also horns and drums. If we're in a small room, then you get horns and drums off the stage. But in a room like this, really, we'll get really close to being show ready, as opposed to taking that first song and doing your sound check for the first song of the night. We were just up in Tahoe the other day, and that was just completely open air. And those are the greatest venues, unless it's windy. That's the only problem with the open airs normally, is the wind wreaks havoc on the high end, and people don't understand that the weather can actually affect what they're hearing. You know, they'll say, "Oh, it doesn't sound right." I go, "Yeah, it doesn't sound right to me either, but I can't do anything about it." But the open airs are normally great because you don't have to deal with any reflections. There's no builds anywhere. There's no, you know, sub-lobes anywhere. And normally you can have a really pretty easy going time on an outdoor venue, as long as you're not getting rained on or a thunderstorm. Indoors, you know, we play it by the room. We'll do the same thing every day for the most part. I'll run a measurement mic around and take some snapshots of the room, and then we'll average them and kind of EQ off that. And then I still bring the PA out with my voice. I know that my vocal through a Beta 58 better than anything else is the best tool for tuning still, plus the virtual sound check helps a lot too. My philosophy is if the input sounds good, I'll leave it, and then I'll tune the system accordingly. I don't really like, during the show, I really don't like to touch my EQs on my actual inputs. I'd rather work the system as opposed to start dumping stuff out of inputs, unless there's something really problematic. But these guys are pretty consistent, so it doesn't happen very often. We try to stay true to the records, but we try to give it a live experience as well too, that you're not going to get from going home and listening to the record. When I go to a concert, I want to hear the music that I'm accustomed to, but I want to get that experience of going to see a show live. I say all the time that I can never go back at this point. I'm going to have to be on the road forever, because I can't sit at home and do a 9-to-5 job, because I go crazy. I do some outside work in Vegas when I'm home, but normally it's like corporate AV type stuff, and that drives me nuts. After 2 weeks of that, I'd better go back on tour for 6 months.